I went undercover as janitor in my company. What I discovered made me fire my top manager on the spot. I never imagined I'd be the kind of CEO who had to spy on his own company. But the last year had been rough. Morale was tanking, turnover was at an all-time high, and the quarterly reports kept showing miscellaneous expenses nobody could clearly explain. I'd built my tech company, Oronic Solutions, from scratch over 15 years, and I refused to let it rot from the inside. For months, I'd been getting anonymous complaints through our whistleblower email, but most were vague. Toxic work environment, favoritism, someone stealing, sexual harassment. I ordered HR to look into it. They handed me neat reports insisting everything was within acceptable bounds. Yet I kept noticing little signs that told a different story. Our client churn rate had quietly doubled. Star employees were leaving for competitors with no exit interviews. Costs were ballooning in facilities and operations, but our services weren't improving. One day, a supplier I'd known for years called my personal line in a panic. He told me he'd tried to escalate unpaid invoices, only to be stonewalled. He said, "I've never seen a company so determined to bury records. It's like someone's hiding something big." I called an all-hands meeting with my senior team. Greg was there, sitting in the front row with that smug grin. When I asked direct questions, why are vendors unpaid? Why is our support backlog 3 times higher than last year? Why are we losing engineers every month? Nobody gave a straight answer. Some just looked at the floor. That night, I lay awake replaying everything in my head. This company was my life's work. If I trusted the same people who were failing me to fix the problem, I'd be a fool. I realized there was only one way to uncover the truth, to see it myself, with no filter, no polished reports, no excuses. And that's when I decided I'd become invisible. I'd go undercover as the lowest-ranking employee in my own company to see exactly what was happening when everyone thought the boss was gone. So, I decided to pull an undercover boss, only with far less TV gloss. I didn't tell a single soul except my wife and my legal advisor. I had HR create a temp janitorial contract with a third-party staffing agency. Within 2 weeks, I had a fake ID badge, a uniform with the logo, Prime Facility Services, and a schedule of evening shifts cleaning the offices. The first night I stepped into the building wearing that navy coverall and cheap cap, my heart actually raced. Nobody glanced twice at me. The receptionist handed me a clipboard and told me the cleaning crew worked from 6 p.m. to midnight, mostly unseen by management. Perfect. My second night in the building, I spotted Greg, the senior operations manager, berating a young developer in front of the entire floor over a missed deadline. The poor guy, his name tag read Devin, looked like he might burst into tears. Greg slammed a stack of papers down so hard the desk rattled. "I don't care if your code works. You didn't hit your target metrics. Fix it before morning or don't bother showing up." I recognized that tone. Greg had always been aggressive, but I'd had no idea he'd gotten so blatantly abusive. I scribbled the incident into the small notebook I kept hidden inside my supply cart. Over the next week, I became invisible. I cleaned conference tables, emptied trash, wiped down whiteboards, and observed everything. It stunned me how much you could learn when people thought you were beneath notice. On Wednesday, around 9 p.m., I caught Greg again. This time cornering a new hire, a young woman named Priya, in the break room. He leaned against the vending machine, smirking as he blocked her exit. "You know, if you want to make a good impression around here, it helps to be friendly. Maybe have a drink with me after hours," he was saying, his voice low. Priya looked deeply uncomfortable, hugging her folder to her chest. "I really need to finish my documentation," she stammered. "Come on. I can make your probation period much easier." "Or harder," Greg said, his grin widening. I gripped my mop so tightly my knuckles turned white. That same night, when Greg finally walked out, Priya stayed behind. I waited until she noticed me and gave her a reassuring nod. "Don't let him scare you," I said quietly. "You did nothing wrong." She looked startled but managed a grateful smile before hurrying away. It was in these small moments I realized how toxic Greg's presence had become. I kept collecting evidence. Recordings on my phone, photos of neglected maintenance issues he ignored while inflating his department's budgets, and logs of his late-night intimidation sessions. While Greg was a walking scandal, there were employees on the other end of the spectrum. One evening, I found Kelly, a customer support lead, staying past 10 p.m. to help a client in a different time zone. She didn't know I was listening when she said softly over the headset, "You're not just a number to us." I'll stay on the line until this is fixed. Later, she cleaned up the team's shared space herself. Nobody asked her to. She simply wanted her colleagues to return to a tidy area in the morning. I wrote her name down on a separate page in my notebook. I had plans for her. Friday night, something happened that made everything snap into focus. I was mopping the front lobby when I heard the elevators ping. 2 men from accounting came out, deep in hushed conversation. If you don't approve the vendor invoices, they'll keep asking questions, one said. Yeah, but they're already 2 months overdue. And it's, like, 50 grand, the other whispered. Just do it. Greg said he'd take care of the CEO if this ever came up. I stood behind a column, heart thumping. Take care of? What the hell did that mean? Bribery? Blackmail? At that moment, I knew this had gone further than a single bully manager. There was a rot spreading through my company's core, and I had no choice but to cut it out myself. I went home that night, laid my notebook on the kitchen table, and started drafting a plan. Some employees would get the recognition they deserved. Others would never set foot in my building again. My second week as Paul, the janitor, cemented every suspicion I'd carried in my gut. By now, nobody spared me more than a passing glance. That anonymity became my greatest weapon. Every night, I'd push my mop cart through the corridors and watch the real company emerge, unvarnished, unedited, ugly. Monday evening, I made my way through the open-plan sales floor, which was empty except for the glow of a few screens left on standby. I'd nearly finished wiping down desks when a voice drifted from the corner conference room. The glass walls were partially covered by a poster advertising our company's mission statement: innovate, elevate, inspire, but I could see just enough. Inside, Greg sat at the head of the table, drinking what looked like whiskey from a coffee mug. Across from him was Derek, one of the senior accountants. You realize the auditors will be here next quarter, Derek said in a low voice. Greg swirled his drink. You think I care? By the time they get curious, the invoices will be laundered through the new vendor account. And if they trace it, it'll look like an error in accounts payable. Derek rubbed his forehead. This is getting out of control. Greg slammed his mug onto the table. You're in this too. Don't act holier than thou. We've got a system. The CEO's too busy posing for magazine covers to notice. I felt heat rising in my face. A system? How long had they been siphoning money out of this company? That night, when I got home, I made detailed notes, which vendors they mentioned, the dates, even Greg's offhand comment about how the CEO wouldn't know a real ledger if it hit him in the face. I started keeping my phone in my breast pocket with the audio recorder running whenever I was on shift. But even in that darkness, there were moments that reminded me why I built Oronix in the first place. On Tuesday, I found Kelly, the customer support lead, taking a call from a furious client in Singapore. She was calm, patient, never once raising her voice. When she finally ended the call, nearly 2 hours later, she looked exhausted. But then she stayed to write detailed notes so the morning team wouldn't have to start from scratch. I waited until she stood, stretching her back, and offered her a small smile. She looked a little embarrassed to see the janitor watching her work so hard. You do more than most people would, I said quietly. She shrugged. Someone has to care. I nearly told her who I was right then. But I knew I had to wait. Wednesday brought another revelation. While cleaning the marketing department, I overheard 2 junior employees whispering near the snack counter. I heard Priya put in a transfer request, one said. After what Greg did to her. I don't blame her, the other replied. She won't get it. He already told HR she was disruptive. My stomach turned. So Greg was actively sabotaging the people he harassed. By Thursday, I started noticing how even the smallest injustices piled up. The cleaning crew before me had been deliberately assigned broken vacuums and the oldest supplies. When I asked a facilities supervisor about replacements, he snapped, just make do. You're paid to clean, not to complain. It wasn't lost on me that the same culture of disregard trickled down through every department. I took photos of every neglected maintenance request, every time a manager ignored a safety hazard, every late invoice shoved in a drawer. But Friday night was when everything escalated. I was collecting trash bags outside the engineering bullpen when I spotted Greg again. He was leaning over Devin's workstation, practically hissing in the young developer's ear. You think working late makes you look good? You're a liability. If you don't stop poking around in code you weren't assigned, I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. Devin swallowed hard. there were errors in the billing module. I thought. You thought? Greg snorted. You don't get paid to think. You get paid to do what you're told. He stormed off, nearly colliding with me as he exited the room. I kept my head down, pretending to fiddle with the trash liner. But I heard Devin take a shaky breath and mutter under his breath, "I'm not crazy. I know there's something there." That was when it clicked. Devin had stumbled onto whatever Greg was trying to cover up in the billing system. When I left that night, I didn't go home. I drove straight to an old friend, a former cybersecurity consultant I'd hired years ago. "I need help," I told him. "I need to prove someone's stealing from my company." He nodded without hesitation. "All right," he said. "Let's burn it all down." I knew then it was only a matter of time before Greg and his accomplices would face everything they'd done. Over the weekend, my old friend Max, ex-cybersecurity lead and the most trustworthy person I knew, set up a secure laptop for me. We created a covert login to the internal systems that wouldn't trigger any alerts. My Undercover Janitor badge might have been fake, but my CEO credentials still had the highest access level. Sunday night, I sat in my study reviewing everything, my handwritten notes, the audio files, the photos of neglected safety issues, and Greg's vile threats. I knew this evidence alone would be enough to fire him. But if I wanted a real case, one that couldn't be swept under the rug, I needed a clear trail showing how the money was disappearing. Max and I started with the billing modules. By Monday afternoon, he had decrypted months of logs Devin had flagged. What we found was worse than I'd feared. Greg and Derek had created duplicate vendor accounts with almost identical names to real suppliers. Each month, they processed payments to these fakes, siphoning tens of thousands into offshore accounts. It was an elaborate shell game. One that only someone familiar with our old legacy system would even know how to manipulate. By Tuesday evening, I had the proof. I returned to my shift that night feeling more determined than ever. When I walked in, Devin was still at his desk, bleary-eyed, clearly afraid to go home. He looked up as I passed, his expression guarded. I stopped. "Rough week?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. He hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," he murmured, "but something's wrong with the billing data. Every time I try to show someone, Greg shows up and I don't know. It's like he already knows I'm looking." I kept my expression neutral. "You're not imagining it." He blinked, startled. I lowered my voice. "Don't stop. You're onto something important. Just, be smart. Back up everything." Devin stared at me, confused, but I could see a flicker of hope in his eyes. That same night, I made my way to the break room, where Kelly was preparing a pot of stale coffee. "You really don't have to be here this late," I said. She smiled tiredly. "If I leave early, the queue will bury the team tomorrow." I leaned on my mop handle. "You deserve better." Her eyes widened a little, but she only said, "Somebody has to care." I committed then and there to make sure she was rewarded when this was over. Wednesday, I decided to push things further. I waited until Greg had his usual post-dinner drink in the conference room. Then I entered with my cart, acting as though I hadn't noticed him. I wiped the whiteboard and pretended not to hear as he took a call. "No, we're fine. The CEO's too busy polishing his LinkedIn profile to notice anything. By the time he realizes what's happening, we'll be long gone." A long pause. "Yeah, I've got the backups. If he tries to pin this on me, I'll bury him in bad press." I nearly laughed at the irony. That night, Max helped me compile the recordings into a secure folder. I backed everything up twice, once on a hard drive I kept in a locked box, and once in cloud storage under a new legal account only my lawyer could access. Thursday, I noticed something interesting. Kelly was helping Priya. The two of them were poring over a binder full of HR policies, whispering urgently. I didn't want to interrupt, but as I passed, I heard Priya say, "He threatened to blacklist me if I spoke up." Kelly placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Then we'll document everything. He can't fire both of us." For the first time, I felt a surge of genuine pride. Despite the rot at the top, there were people fighting to do the right thing. That night, I drafted the first stage of my plan. First, I'd call a board meeting for the following week, citing urgent financial disclosures. Second, I'd prepare termination paperwork for Greg and Derek. Third, I'd draft public commendations for Kelly and Devin. Fourth, I'd arrange a personal gift to recognize Kelly's dedication, something that would change her life. Friday night was when the last piece fell into place. I arrived early, wanting to check Greg's office while he was still in the executive gym. Inside, I found a locked cabinet behind his desk. It only took Max's skeleton key to pop it open. Inside were folders of forged invoices, a ledger of payouts to the offshore account, and, most chilling, a list of employees Greg had labeled threats. Devon's name was at the top, followed by Priya, and even Kelly. It was everything I needed. As I relocked the cabinet, I realized I was no longer angry. I was calm, resolute. Greg thought he was untouchable. In less than a week, he'd discover just how wrong he was. The weekend before the showdown, I barely slept. I kept replaying every conversation in my mind. Greg's smug threats, Derek's weak excuses, the fear in Priya's eyes, Devon's quiet desperation. Sunday evening, I finally let myself call my wife. I'd tried to keep her from worrying, but she deserved to know how deep the rot went. "Are you sure you want to do this yourself?" she asked gently. "I have to," I said. "This company is supposed to be something good. If I don't stand up for the people trying to do their jobs, who will?" She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Then finish it. We'll be waiting for you when it's over." On Monday morning, I showered, shaved the stubble I'd let grow to look older and rougher, and dressed in my usual tailored suit. For the first time in weeks, I walked into the building as myself. The front desk receptionist, who'd handed me that clipboard countless times, did a double take. "Mr. Hale. I didn't know you'd be in today." "I like surprises," I said evenly. I took the elevator straight up to the executive floor. The glass conference room looked exactly as it had the day Greg called me clueless. I stood for a moment at the threshold, remembering the nights I'd mopped this floor, invisible. Then I stepped inside and called my assistant. "Please gather the board and all department heads. I have urgent matters to discuss." Within the hour, everyone was seated. Greg strolled in last, coffee in hand, wearing that same smirk. When he saw me at the head of the table, his expression faltered. But only for a second. "Sir," he said smoothly, "this is unexpected." "I'm sure it is," I said. I nodded to my assistant. She shut the door. Then I placed a thick folder on the table. "This," I began, my voice carrying across the room, "is a record of embezzlement, harassment, and fraud that's been happening under our noses. In some cases, orchestrated by members of this very room." Nobody breathed. I flipped the first page, a printout of Greg's duplicate vendor scheme. These are invoices paid to shell companies, totaling over $600,000. They were approved by Greg Harper and Derek Nash. Derek turned sheet white. Greg just leaned back, crossing his arms. "You have no proof those accounts are fake," he said calmly. I nodded to Max, who was standing in the corner in a borrowed maintenance uniform. He stepped forward and plugged in a drive. The projector lit up with screenshots of the offshore transfers, timestamps, and Greg's authorization codes. "You were saying?" I asked. Greg's jaw worked, but no sound came out. I continued, methodical and cold. "Greg, you have also repeatedly used your position to intimidate and harass employees. You sabotaged career advancement, threatened professional blacklisting, and fostered a culture of fear." A collective rustle swept the room. No one dared meet Greg's eyes. "I have audio recordings of these threats," I said, gesturing to a small speaker. I let the recording play, Greg telling Priya she could make her probation easier if she was friendly, and threatening Devon's career. When it finished, the silence was deafening. I turned to the head of HR. "You told me there was no evidence. Care to explain?" She looked stricken. I never saw any complaints in writing. That ends today," I said. I picked up Greg's termination letter and set it in front of him. "You are hereby terminated for cause, effective immediately." He looked at me, his smirk gone, his face pale. "You think you can just—" "Yes," I interrupted. "And I just did." 2 security guards stepped into the room. Greg glared at me, but he knew he was finished. "You'll hear from my lawyer," he hissed as they escorted him out. I didn't look away. Once the door shut, I addressed the remaining managers. "This company belongs to all of us," I said quietly. "If you see something wrong, you bring it to me. No more excuses. No more fear." I paused to let that sink in. And for those who did the right thing, I looked over at Kelly, who had come in late, clutching her notes, unaware she'd be in the meeting. "Kelly, would you stand?" She looked startled but rose to her feet. You stayed late to help customers. You cleaned up after your team. You protected your coworkers when nobody else would. This company needs more people like you. I reached under the table and retrieved a small envelope. This is the title to a new car, your choice of model. It's a small token of gratitude for your dedication. Her eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth with her hand. And Devin, I continued, nodding to the young developer sitting near the door, I know you feared speaking up. You were right to follow your instincts. Effective immediately, you are promoted to senior developer, with a salary increase. I trust you to help clean up the systems. Devin looked like he couldn't breathe. The room was silent, but it felt different, a collective exhale after months of tension. I closed my folder. This is a new chapter. You have my word, no one here will be punished for honesty again. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The day after Greg's termination, I arrived at the office early. The morning sun was just coming over the skyline as I unlocked my door. My phone was already buzzing with news outlets asking for comment. Somehow, word had leaked overnight that Oronix had fired a senior executive for misconduct. I didn't respond to the press. Not yet. Instead, I called a private meeting with Derek, the senior accountant who'd helped Greg. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. When he sat down across from me, he started to stammer an apology. I was in over my head, he whispered, voice cracking. Greg said if I didn't approve the invoices, he'd ruin me. I studied him for a long moment. Did you take any of the money yourself? His face turned red. No. I swear it. I only signed off because I was terrified. I believed him, partially. The evidence showed Derek had never moved money into personal accounts. But he'd still enabled it. Derek, I said, I'm not going to have you arrested. But you will resign today. He swallowed hard and nodded. Before he left, I said quietly, if you ever find yourself working under someone who demands your complicity again, remember, fear is the reason rot spreads. Speak up next time. He didn't answer, just walked out with his shoulders slumped. By mid-morning, I held an all-hands company meeting. The entire staff gathered in the atrium, murmuring anxiously. They'd all heard rumors, Greg escorted out, Derek vanishing, someone getting a promotion. I stepped onto the small platform, microphone in hand. Most of you know me as the CEO, I began, voice steady. What you don't know is that I've spent the past month working alongside you, cleaning floors, emptying trash, listening. A ripple of astonishment moved through the crowd. I spotted Kelly standing near the back, a hand over her mouth. Devin was beside her, looking stunned. I did this because I love this company, I continued. And I won't stand by while it becomes something ugly. I laid out everything in plain terms, without naming employees beyond Greg, since that was already public. I explained the embezzlement, the intimidation, the abuse of power. Let this be clear, no one here is untouchable, I said. If you treat your coworkers with cruelty or disregard, you have no place at Oronix. But if you work with integrity, if you care about your colleagues, you have my full support. Silence followed. Then, slowly, applause began. Hesitant at first, then swelling until the entire room thundered with it. I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been tight for months. After the meeting, Kelly approached me, tears still in her eyes. Mr. Hale, I don't even know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, I told her. Just keep doing what you've been doing. Devin stepped forward, clutching a folder. I backed up all the error logs, he said, voice shaking. In case you want to see exactly where the billing manipulation started. I took the folder and nodded. I'm proud of you. He blinked, looking like he'd never been told that before. That afternoon, HR processed Greg's termination and Derek's resignation. I signed paperwork to freeze the fraudulent vendor accounts and launched a forensic audit of all operations expenses for the past 2 years. It was late evening when I returned to my office. The building was quiet. I looked around at the framed awards, the clean conference table, the polished floors. For the first time in weeks, I felt like this place belonged to me again. I pulled out my old janitor uniform from the bottom drawer where I'd hidden it. I set it on the desk, running a hand over the stitched logo, Prime Facility Services. It felt almost surreal. That uniform had shown me everything I needed to know. Before I left for the night, I sent one last email, subject. Recognition and gratitude body, to all employees, over the past month, I've witnessed acts of courage, integrity, and care that reminded me why this company exists. While we have removed individuals who betrayed our values, many more of you have shown true dedication. In the coming weeks, we will be implementing a new recognition program to ensure your contributions are never overlooked again. If you have concerns or ideas, my door is open. Thank you for your resilience. We are stronger than the worst among us. James Hale, CEO. I hit send and leaned back in my chair. The hardest part was over. But I knew rebuilding trust would take time. Still, for the first time in a long while, I was hopeful. The following week, the audit team began its work. I'd hired an external firm, one with no ties to Oryx, to ensure complete neutrality. They set up a temporary office in what had once been Greg's domain. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every morning, I met with the auditors to review findings. Every afternoon, I walked the floors, this time as myself, without disguise, and spoke directly to employees. Some were nervous to talk. Others seemed relieved to finally have their voices heard. By Tuesday, new information started to surface. One of the more shocking discoveries was a culture of petty cruelty Greg had cultivated among a handful of mid-level managers. They'd learned to imitate him, berating their teams, hoarding resources, and squashing any suggestions that might have exposed the fraud. One afternoon, I sat down with Priya. She looked exhausted but determined. "Thank you," she said as soon as she sat across from me. I was ready to quit. "You shouldn't have had to endure any of this," I said. "We failed you." She hesitated, then handed me a slim flash drive. I kept copies of all the emails. I thought maybe, if anyone ever cared. I took the drive carefully. "You did the right thing. I'll make sure this helps protect others." After she left, I plugged it into my secure laptop. The emails were exactly what I needed, proof that Greg and his closest allies had orchestrated systematic harassment and cover-ups. Wednesday morning, I called another meeting, this time with the remaining department heads. "We are cleaning house," I said plainly. "If you have participated in this behavior, now is your moment to come forward. If you don't, and we find evidence later, you will be terminated for cause." 3 managers resigned on the spot. I accepted their resignations without ceremony. Over the next few days, I made it clear that we were not going back to business as usual. I announced a new policy: no more anonymous complaints disappearing into HR's black hole. Instead, employees could submit concerns directly to an ombudsman, someone not employed by Oryx, answerable only to the board. At first, people were skeptical. But slowly, they began to trust that things were different. On Thursday, I visited the customer support floor. Kelly was at her station, her new car keys tucked discreetly in her bag. She looked up, startled to see me standing at her desk. "I wanted to thank you again," I said quietly. She blushed. "I just did what anyone decent would have done." "Maybe," I said, "but decency matters more than ever." That day, I sent out a company-wide survey asking what changes employees most wanted. The responses were honest, sometimes brutally so. But I preferred ugly truth over polished lies. By Friday afternoon, I sat with Devin in my office. He looked like he still hadn't quite processed everything. "You've proven yourself beyond any doubt," I told him. "But I have a question for you." He swallowed nervously. "Sure. You had the courage to challenge what you saw. What would you do to help us make sure this never happens again?" He blinked, surprised. I don't know. Maybe better internal audits? Anonymous reporting with actual follow-through? More cross-checking so no one person has too much power? I nodded. "Good. You're going to help design the new oversight protocols." His eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," I said. "We need people who care." He looked like he might cry, so I simply shook his hand and let him go. That night, as I packed up to leave, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the audit team: "We have completed the first phase of the investigation. Please review the attached report." I sat back down, heart heavy, and opened the document. The scope of the theft and abuse was bigger than I'd guessed. Greg had been running versions of his scheme for years, stealing not just money, but people's dignity. I closed the file and looked out over the city lights. Tomorrow, the real work would begin, repairing what had been broken. But I was no longer afraid. Monday dawned cold and clear. I arrived at the office before sunrise, determined to begin fixing the damage Greg and his cronies had done. The audit report weighed heavy in my mind. Hundreds of thousands in fraudulent payments, a list of employees who'd been systematically driven out, and an entire generation of middle managers trained to value intimidation over collaboration. As I sat in my office with a mug of black coffee, I realized how close I'd come to losing everything, not just financially, but morally. I spent the morning drafting a detailed communication to the entire company. "This is not just about accountability," I wrote. "This is about rebuilding trust. We will confront what went wrong, and we will create an environment where it cannot happen again." I attached a summary of the findings. Transparent but careful not to humiliate innocent employees who'd been deceived. After hitting send, I met with our legal counsel. "Will Greg try to sue?" I asked bluntly. "Possibly," she replied. "But you have overwhelming evidence. And with the board's backing, he doesn't have much leverage." That was enough for me. By late afternoon, I began the next phase, speaking directly with every department. First was customer support. I stood at the front of the bullpen, with Kelly seated in her usual spot. "I'm here to answer any questions you have," I said. One young woman raised her hand. Why did it take so long to see what was happening? The question was fair, and it stung. Because I trusted the wrong people, I admitted. And because I didn't look closely enough. That will never happen again. Kelly gave me the smallest nod, like she understood. Later that day, I sat down with Priya. "I reviewed your transfer request," I told her. "If you still want to move to a different team, I'll personally approve it." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know anymore. Part of me wants to stay and prove I belong." "Then stay," I said. "You've already proven it." Her eyes shone with tears. As the week went on, I implemented more changes, an independent ethics hotline, fully funded and monitored by a third-party firm. Mandatory training for all managers, focused on leadership without intimidation. Anonymous pulse surveys, so I'd know sooner if the culture started to decay again. A new recognition program, where employees could nominate colleagues for going above and beyond. On Wednesday, Kelly was the first nomination. Devin submitted it, writing simply, "She showed me how to stand up for myself." I approved it without hesitation. Thursday, I invited Devin to a working lunch in my office. He looked more confident every day, like someone finally allowed to be himself. "I want you to lead the team auditing our billing system," I told him. His jaw dropped. "Me? But you're the person who caught it," I said. "And you're the person I trust." He swallowed, then nodded. "I'll do my best," he said. "I know you will." That evening, as I packed up to leave, I noticed the old janitor uniform still folded in the corner of my office. I almost put it away, but then I stopped. Instead, I took it out and laid it over my chair, so I'd never forget how easily power can blind you, and how clarity comes from seeing what most people overlook. Friday morning, I got a call from a recruiter I knew. "Greg's already shopping his resume," he said. "Tell your clients they'd better check references," I replied dryly. After I hung up, I walked the building one last time before the weekend. I stopped by the break room, where Kelly and Priya were having coffee. "Morning," I said. "Morning, Mr. Hale," Kelly replied. "James," I corrected gently. They exchanged a small, almost amused glance. "James," Priya said, smiling. I looked around at the floor, clean, bright, and, for the first time in a long time, free of the quiet dread that had hung over it. This was what I'd built Oronix for. And it was worth fighting for. The following week, the atmosphere in the building felt transformed. It wasn't that everything was perfect, far from it. There were still rumors to squash, still wariness in some faces. But the heavy tension that had once pressed on every conversation was gone. I started each morning the same way, walking the floors. I didn't bring an entourage or call ahead. I simply appeared, notebook in hand, and asked questions. "How's the workload this week? Is there anything that isn't working the way it should? Have you had any problems getting support from other teams?" At first, people were hesitant. But after a few days, they realized I actually listened. One afternoon, I sat in the engineering bullpen with Devin and his newly assembled audit team, 5 young developers who looked both terrified and exhilarated to be tasked with fixing the billing system. Devin had a whiteboard covered in diagrams of how the legacy modules connected. He looked up when I entered. "Sorry, it's a mess in here," he said, gesturing at the tangle of notes and pizza boxes. "It's the best kind of mess," I told him. "Progress." He grinned, shy but proud. After we discussed their timeline, I pulled Devin aside. "You've done more in a month than some people did in years," I said. "When this is finished, we'll talk about a more permanent leadership role." His eyes widened. "Thank you. I don't really have words." "You don't need any," I said. "Just keep going." On Wednesday, Kelly stopped by my office, fidgeting with her lanyard. "I wanted to say something," she began. "Of course. When you gave me that car, I didn't know how to accept it," she said. "It felt like too much. But then I realized, it wasn't about the car. It was about being seen." I nodded. "You were seen," I said. "And you still are." She smiled, a little shaky, and left without another word. Thursday afternoon, Priya requested a meeting. She sat across from me, hands folded. "I decided I'm staying," she said firmly. "I'm glad to hear that," I said. "But I don't want to just go back to normal," she continued. "I want to help other people who get targeted. Maybe we could create a mentorship program. Or an anonymous network for support." I was taken aback by how clear-eyed she looked. "That's an excellent idea," I told her. "Draft a proposal, and we'll make it happen." As she left, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: pride. Not in my own accomplishments, but in the people who'd chosen to stay and rebuild. Friday, I called the board to give them a final update on the investigation. "Greg's actions cost us more than money," I said. "They cost us trust. But we're earning it back." They agreed to issue a public statement acknowledging what had happened and outlining our reforms. That afternoon, I gathered the company in the atrium for what I promised would be the last big meeting for a while. "I won't pretend this has been easy," I began. "It hasn't. But you've all shown what it means to be resilient." I paused, scanning the faces. "This company isn't a building or a brand. It's the people inside it. You are what makes Oryx worth saving." There was no applause this time, just a collective, solemn understanding. That was enough. When the meeting ended, people lingered, talking to each other in a way I hadn't seen in months. I stepped back, letting them own the space again. Later that evening, as I walked through the darkened halls, I thought about the lessons I'd learned. Power doesn't mean control. It means responsibility. Trust isn't given, it's earned, every day. And sometimes, you have to become invisible to see the truth. I paused by the janitor's closet, where my mop and cart had sat. Someone else was cleaning tonight, someone whose name I made a note to learn. Because if there was one thing I'd realized, it was that everyone mattered. Even the people no one ever noticed. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of rebuilding. One by one, the audits concluded. Every report confirmed what I'd already known: the rot had been systematic but not unstoppable. The losses were substantial, but the damage to morale was the true cost. Yet every day, small signs showed me the tide was turning. On Monday morning, Devin sent me an email outlining the first set of fixes for the billing system. At the bottom, he'd added a note. "I don't know if I ever said this, but, thank you for believing me." I replied simply, "Thank you for not giving up." That same afternoon, Priya stopped by with her proposal for the mentorship and support network. "We want to call it the Lighthouse," she explained. "Somewhere people can find help before they're in crisis." I read every page. It was thoughtful, practical, and exactly what we needed. "It's approved," I told her. "We'll fund it fully." She broke into a smile that was all relief and hope. On Wednesday, Kelly emailed me to say she'd used her new car to start a volunteer shuttle program, giving rides to coworkers who couldn't afford reliable transportation. "You gave me something good," she wrote. "I wanted to pass it on." I read that message 3 times, feeling something loosen in my chest I hadn't even known was still tight. Thursday afternoon, I walked the halls again. No disguise this time, no mop in my hand. But I looked at everything the same way, like I was seeing it for the first time. The break room was full of chatter and laughter. Nobody fell silent when I walked by. The engineering bullpen buzzed with energy instead of fear. Devin and his team had turned the whiteboard chaos into a neatly organized workflow. In customer support, Kelly was leaning over Priya's desk, helping her with a ticket escalation. They both looked up and waved when they saw me. I waved back, heart full. That evening, I hosted a small reception in the main lobby, nothing fancy, just coffee and pastries, and a chance for people to gather without pretense. When I stood to speak, it wasn't with a prepared statement. I just talked from the heart. "I know some of you are still wary," I began. "That's fair. Trust doesn't come back overnight. But I want you to know this, you matter. You always did. I looked around at all the faces. Some tired, some hopeful, all of them watching me with a cautious kind of faith. When I put on that uniform, it wasn't because I didn't trust you, I continued. It was because I didn't trust myself to see clearly. I was too far removed from what really mattered. Someone in the back dabbed at their eyes. I won't make that mistake again, I said. And I promise you, no one here will ever be invisible. This time, there was no thunderous applause, just a soft chorus of agreement and the quiet understanding that something important had shifted. Later, as people drifted out in twos and threes, Devin came over to me. I've been thinking, he said. About the day you told me not to stop. If you hadn't, I don't know what would have happened. You found your voice, I told him. And you used it. He looked away, swallowing hard. It feels good to finally be proud of coming to work. I nodded. It feels good for me, too. That night, when the last employee left, I stood alone in the quiet lobby. I thought about the first night I'd walked in as Paul the janitor. How scared I'd been, of what I'd find, and of what it would mean. Now I knew, you don't fix a broken culture with edicts or policies alone. You fix it by standing with the people who care, and by never letting them fight alone. I turned off the lights and locked the door behind me. Tomorrow, we'd keep going. And this time, we'd go together. The next Monday marked exactly 2 months since I'd first put on that janitor's uniform. I woke early, feeling calmer than I had in years. It wasn't that everything was perfect, far from it, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing we were finally moving in the right direction. As I dressed, I thought about the first day I'd slipped unnoticed past my own reception desk. The fear, the disbelief, the disappointment. All of it had been necessary. Without that journey, I would never have understood just how fragile trust can be, or how strong it becomes when you fight to earn it back. When I arrived at the office, the atrium was already full of life. Kelly was talking with Priya and 2 new hires, showing them where to find supplies. Devin stood by the elevators, holding a box of donuts he'd apparently brought for his team. I paused just inside the door, taking it all in. I walked over to the janitor's closet. The same one I'd used every night of my undercover weeks. Inside, it smelled of industrial soap and lemon. The mop bucket was freshly rinsed. The uniforms hung in neat rows. I slipped my old name badge, Paul, onto a hook on the wall. For a moment, I rested my hand against it. Thank you, I thought. For teaching me to see. Then I closed the door. That morning, we held our first lighthouse meeting. Priya stood at the front, outlining how the mentorship network would work. A rotating schedule of volunteer advisors, a protected Slack channel, and confidential reporting. I sat in the back, letting her own the moment. She deserved it. When she finished, the room burst into applause. She glanced at me, her eyes bright, and I nodded. Afterward, Kelly caught up with me near the coffee station. James, she said, smiling shyly, I just wanted to say, thank you for staying. Most CEOs would have just sold the company or stepped down. I thought about it, I admitted. But this place is part of me. She nodded. It's part of us, too. Later that afternoon, I held a quiet ceremony to formally recognize everyone who'd stood up when it counted. Devin received an award for his diligence and promotion to permanent senior developer. Kelly accepted her recognition plaque for extraordinary service and leadership. Priya was officially named head of the Lighthouse Initiative. Each of them deserved more than I could ever give. Before everyone left, I made one final announcement. Effective immediately, I said, our company values are being rewritten. Not by me, not by the board, but by all of you. A ripple of surprise moved through the group. I want a committee of employees at every level, engineers, support staff, accounting, janitorial, to define what Orenic stands for. It was quiet, then Kelly raised her hand. And you'll actually follow it? She asked, a teasing note in her voice. I laughed. That's the idea. She grinned. That evening, as the sun set over the city, I walked the halls one last time before going home. I paused in the empty engineering bullpen, the desks neat and humming with quiet purpose even after hours. I thought of Greg's threats, Derek's fear, and how close I'd come to losing faith in everything. Then I thought of Devin, Priya, Kelly, and everyone else who'd refused to look the other way. This was what mattered. On my way out, I passed the janitor who'd taken over my old shifts. His name tag read Luis. He looked startled when I stopped to shake his hand. "Thank you," I said simply. He blinked. "For cleaning?" "For caring," I said. He looked confused, but he smiled anyway. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt something deep and steady in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Because I knew now, without any doubt. A company is only as good as the people willing to stand up for what's right. And I would never again let them stand alone.